welcome to my channel. My name is Kate, and today I'm going to be doing the Finally Fall book tag. It has been quite some time since I've done a tag. I actually have several that I will hopefully be posting relatively soon, but this one had a bit of a time limit on it, so I had to prioritize it. I was recently tagged in this by Anitha, and I'll post her version of this in the cards and in the description so you can check that out. She has an awesome channel. I always love watching her videos. I highly recommend checking her out if you haven't already. And I know I am squeaking this in at basically the last second for it being fall, since we're about to turn over into December, and that's typically no longer considered fall. But I really wanted to do this one because fall is my favorite season, and it was fun to look at all these prompts and come up with stuff. So without any further ado, I will get into the actual prompts. Number 1, in fall the air is crisp and clear. Name a book with a vivid setting. Now for this tag, I was trying to think of books that I hadn't talked about previously, but I did not succeed for this particular one, and what I picked for vivid setting is probably no surprise, and that is Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I am a new fan of this. I didn't actually read this as a kid. I had a hard time getting into it because it is so descriptive, but recently fell in love with it this year, and I don't think that you can find more vivid imagery than Tolkien. Love it or hate it, he is very descriptive. He really sets the scene, and you can picture every detail. And I'll admit that the first time that I read this series, especially Fellowship, this really bogged down the story for me. But rereading it has actually made me appreciate the level of detail, and it almost feels nostalgic, even though I'm actually rereading it I'm reading it for the second time this year. I originally read it in March with the Rob Inglis audiobooks, and then when they released the Andy Serkis audiobooks this fall, I've been going through those, and it's just so heartwarming and comforting, really, because you're just coming to this fully formed world that Tolkien is describing for you. But I really love this series, and I honestly couldn't think of anybody with more vivid imagery than Tolkien. Prompt number 2, nature is beautiful but also dying. Name a book that is beautifully written but also deals with a heavy topic like loss or grief. And for that, I picked a book that I haven't managed to talk about that much yet, and that is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. This is a historical fiction. Sometimes it gets shelved as YA and sometimes as adult. It's a coming-of-age story about a young German girl who's growing up during World War II in Germany, and she is orphaned at a young age. I think her father is a communist, and who gets killed, and I don't remember what happens with her mother. It's been a while since I read the book, but she ends up getting fostered to kind of an older German couple, and the story is basically about her growing up in this really difficult time period, and kind of the relationship she has with her foster parents and with the people around her, and how she kind of navigates growing up in Germany during this. You get to see the heartwarming moments where she really makes where she has these relationships with the people around her, and she's kind of she's got this love of books, which is where the book thief comes in, because she ends up snagging books out of Nazi book burnings. And it's also heartbreaking because a lot of awful things happen, as you might expect for a World War II historical fiction. So it's definitely an emotional roller coaster. It's one I'd recommend if you like historical fiction and aren't tired of the World War II historical fiction, because I know that's a pretty solid portion of the genre lately. But it's an older one that I would definitely highly recommend, especially if you're character driven. If you're not character driven, this will not be for you. Prompt number 3, fall is back to school season. Share a nonfiction book that taught you something new. And for that, I picked a book that I actually read in October. It was recommended for the coding boot camp that I'm in. as kind of a book to prep for everything. And I understand why. It is Grit by Angela Duckworth. The author in here really gets into how important it is to be able to persevere and stick to your goals. And she gets into how we tend to be too focused on whether or not you're innately talented at something and less on how much work you put into it. And that there have been multiple studies that have basically shown that the ability to be gritty, as she calls it, and stick to the goals that you set yourself, even when things get really difficult, is a more important predictor of being successful than being immediately good at something. So this was kind of weirdly pragmatically inspiring to me. It was nice to know that even if I'm not the best there is at something right away, then uh, it just means I have to put in the work for it. So I highly recommend this if you're at all interested in kind of personal development type books. It was entertaining, and she tells a lot of stories as she's kind of illustrating her different points. So it kind of helps to make it a little bit less preachy and less dense. So it's definitely one I'd recommend. It's pretty short. Prompt number 4. In order to keep warm, it's good to spend some time with the people we love. Name a fictional family, household, or friend group that you'd like to be a part of. And this one I'll probably see coming a mile away because I love this series. I have a very difficult time not talking about this series all the time. And that is the City Watch series by Terry Pratchett. I picked Night Watch because once you've been introduced to the City Watch, it's really interesting to see kind of their connections, and there's a bit of time hopping that happens in this that really gives you a sense of those characters, those more established characters. And I love the City Watch books because it's such a ragtag group of individuals. I can't call them people because they're not all people. Ragtag group, and they don't always get along, but they clearly love each other. They clearly would do anything for each other. I just adore them. I love the humor in this. I love the social commentary. I really enjoy all of the City Watch books. It always feels comforting and cozy to me to come back to that family. Prompt number 5. The colorful leaves are piling up on the ground. Show us a pile of fall-colored spines. And I don't know why, but for some reason I picked like the heaviest books I own for this. So I won't be holding this up long. But I picked The Books of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. I've read Wizard of Earthsea and enjoyed it. That was quite a few years ago, so I'd like to get back to actually reading the rest of the series. I have Dune with its beautiful coppery spine, and I recently read that this year and loved it. I didn't enjoy it nearly as much the first time I read it, but I was in high school. Wasn't really capable of appreciating that kind of book at that point. And then the top one is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan, which is historical fantasy set in kind of a Chinese, I don't remember the dynasty, but I haven't actually read that one yet. I had to include it though. This is the Illumicrate copy, and I feel like this could be a fall book just by itself. So it's I'm very interested in it, and honestly, it's been the prettiest book Illumicrate I've gotten from Illumicrate. So number 6. Fall is the perfect time for some storytelling by the fireside. Share a book wherein somebody is telling a story. And for this, I picked Hyperion by Dan Simmons. I read this book earlier, like October, I think, is when I read this. I had avoided it for a long time. Just like with Dune, I tend to avoid classic sci-fi because I don't think it will work for my particular preferences a lot of the times. But both Dune and Hyperion have proved me wrong. So it's been interesting. I feel like I need to start reading more classic sci-fi. But Hyperion is told kind of Canterbury Tales style, where it's set in this sci-fi world. You have a group of pilgrims who are all going on this really dangerous pilgrimage on this remote planet, and they're all sharing their stories with each other because each of them has a secret connection to this pilgrimage that might help the others survive. And it's each of the stories is told almost in its own subgenre. There's kind of like a cyberpunk story, and there's a noir style story. I don't think that this book will work for everybody because it's fairly dense. It does no info dumping. It kind of just expects you to figure things out as you go. It doesn't explain anything. And it's definitely on the weird side. But it is more emotional than I expected it to be. I loved many of the stories, and it really worked well for me. So it's definitely one that I'd recommend checking out, but you might get it from your library in case it doesn't work for you. Prompt number 7, the nights are getting darker. Share a dark, creepy read. This is one I know I've talked about before, but I had to. And that is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a paranormal horror story about a group of Native American men who end up crossing some lines when they're younger and they're out hunting, and then it basically comes back to bite them when they are older. This entity that wants revenge for what happened starts basically tracking them down and going after them. It's very creepy. It doesn't get too gruesome, although there are some gross bits. But it worked perfectly for me. I don't like a lot of really gruesome horror, and I tend to be more in a fan of the kind of paranormal creepy rather than like the outright terrifying. So this was right up my alley. I absolutely loved it. I think it's also one of those that does very interesting things with point of view and unreliable narrators. So I definitely think this is a great one to pick up if you're at all interested in paranormal horror. Prompt number 8, the days are getting colder. Name a short, heartwarming read that could warm up somebody's cold and rainy day. And for this one, I picked kind of an odd one. And it is Dial A for Aunties by Jesse Q. Sutanto. This is definitely on the absurd side. It's kind of a mix of contemporary romance and kind of dark comedy, I guess is what I would call it. The basic premise is that there's this young woman, Madeline Chan, who works as a photographer, wedding photographer for her family business. She's been raised by her mom and her aunties, and then they set her up with a blind date with this truly awful person, and she accidentally ends up killing him. And then the story basically follows her trying to figure out what to do. She enlists the help of her mom and aunties to kind of figure out how to keep her from going to jail. And it's absolutely absurd. The things that happen just keep escalating and escalating. The body ends up getting sent to this wedding they're supposed to cover, and then she ends up running into someone from her past, and there's kind of this second chance romance element to it. But you really have to suspend disbelief because it's almost like watching some of those movies where things just keep getting worse, and you don't know how that's possible that it could be reaching these points. But the relationships between Medi and her mom and aunts is fantastic. It really gets into kind of their expectations for her versus what she actually wants in her life. And the amount of bickering between the aunties is just fantastic. So it's a very enjoyable one. The family is so close and loves each other even as they're bickering. So it's also very heartwarming. And it's just a fun romp for a cold and rainy day. Prompt number 9, fall, luckily it's my favorite season, returns every year. Name an old favorite you'd like to return to soon. And for that, I picked The Heirs of the Queen series by Mercedes Lackey. This is a bind-up of the trilogy. I remember reading these as a teen and absolutely loving them. The basic premise, it's this fantasy world basically where the main character Talia grows up in this rural village and then ends up getting picked as a companion for um, this group, for the heralds of Valdemar, who are responsible for basically defending the nation. And she ends up having to help save her queen and country as she's trying to figure out what being a herald means. And there's animal companions, as you may be able to tell from the horse on all of them. But I really want to get back to this and see if it holds up to my very fond memories of it. Number 10, fall is the perfect time for cozy reading nights. Share your favorite cozy reading accessories. I don't have a ton of reading accessories, but when I want cozy reading, it usually involves a blanket on the couch. So I will show you the blanket that I am currently working on. I like to knit, and knitting blankets keeps my hands busy when I have to be doing stuff that's not particularly mentally engaging. So this is the one that I'm currently working on, and it has kind of fall colors, I guess. So it's the Bernat blanket yarn, so it's very fluffy and warm. So I love those blankets. Prompt number 11 is spread the autumn appreciation and tag some people. I am skipping this one because I am filming and posting this on the last day of November. It doesn't feel quite fair to tag anybody since I feel like December's usually the cutoff for fall. But if you like this and you don't care about the seasons delineations, then please feel free to do it. Like I said, fall is my favorite season, and I really love watching these Finally Fall tag videos. I hope you had fun watching this, and I will see you in the next one.